folded inside Hattie Crane's coat pocket. The notice had been read so many times the creases were nearly worn through. Ranch hand wanted. Able-bodied worker. Fair wages. Meals and board provided. Inquire Abel Voss, Cutter Creek, Colorado Territory. She had answered 14 advertisements in the past 2 months, and 13 of them had turned her away the moment they saw a woman standing on the porch instead of a man. The 14th had offered her something she would not repeat in polite company. So when the stage rolled into Cutter Creek on a Thursday in October of 1889, Hattie stepped down onto frozen mud with one carpet bag, a pair of good leather gloves, and the particular quiet courage of a woman who had run entirely out of other options. The mountains rose behind the town in a wall of purple and gray. The wind came off them like a warning. She pulled her coat tighter and asked the stagecoach driver for directions to the Voss spread. He looked at her for a long moment, then pointed north without a word. You get used to that kind of silence out here. People look, they calculate, and they move on. Hattie had learned not to mind it. She had learned a great many things in the 31 years she had been alive, including how to mend fence wire, how to read weather in a cloud bank, how to stretch a side of salt pork across 2 hard weeks, and how to keep walking when every reasonable instinct said to stop. The road north was rutted and pale with frost. Cottonwoods lined a dry creek bed to her left, their branches stripped bare and rattling. To her right, a hawk rode the cold air without moving its wings. Hattie watched it for a moment and thought that was a fine way to travel. She found the gate with the Voss name burned into the crossbeam just as the afternoon light began to flatten and go gold. The house beyond it was solid, log and stone, with a wide porch and a proper chimney already breathing smoke. A good sign. She had learned to read houses the same way she read weather. This one said, "Someone here is holding on." She opened the gate and walked through. She was still 10 yards from the porch steps when the front door swung open and 2 boys came through it, at a dead run, both of them maybe 4 years old, both of them wearing identical expressions of absolute fearlessness. They split around her like water around a rock, circled twice, and came to a stop side by side, staring up at her with dark eyes that were curious and completely unashamed. Hattie stopped walking. She looked down at them. They looked up at her. "You're not a man," the one on the left said. "No," Hattie agreed. "I'm not." Pa said a ranch hand was coming. "Your pa's right. I'm the ranch hand." The boy on the left considered this with tremendous seriousness. The one on the right just nodded, as though it confirmed something he had already suspected. Then both of them turned and ran back inside, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the window glass. Hattie stood in the yard for a moment. She took a slow breath. She walked to the porch. She had her knuckles raised to knock when the door opened again, and this time it was a man who filled the frame. Abel Voss was not what the terse advertisement had prepared her for. He was broad across the shoulders in the way that comes from actual labor rather than vanity, with dark hair going gray at the temples and hands that were calloused to the color of saddle leather. He looked at her the same way the stagecoach driver had, only longer, and with more evident confusion. "You're Hattie Crane," he said. It was not quite a question. "I am, and you didn't mention twin boys in the notice." Something moved across his face. It might have been the beginning of embarrassment. "I didn't think it was relevant to the work." "It's relevant to the board," she said. "A bunkhouse is one thing, a family home is another conversation." He studied her. The twins' faces appeared in the window behind him, noses pressed flat against the glass. Hattie kept her eyes on Abel Voss and did not smile, though it required some effort. "I have a separate room off the kitchen," he said finally. "Lock on the door. My boys won't bother you after dark. I need someone who can work cattle, manage a kitchen garden, and help with the animals come winter. Wages are $12 a month." "14, Hattie said. He blinked. The notice said 12. The notice also failed to mention twins. Another silence. The wind moved between them, cold and impartial. 13, Abel Voss said, and the meals are good. Hattie considered the mountains behind him, the solid house, the smoke rising straight from the chimney into still air. She thought about the 14 advertisements and what had followed them. 13, she agreed, but I'll need that lock to have a working key. He stepped back from the door and held it open. Come in then, Miss Crane. You'll want to see the place before you decide it's worth the trouble. She walked past him into the warmth. The kitchen was the first thing she noticed, because it was the heart of any house, and she had always known it. A good iron stove, well blacked, with a firebox that was not cracked. A table long enough for 6, which seemed ambitious for 3 people, but she did not say so. Shelves along the east wall held flour, cornmeal, dried beans, a crock of lard, and enough salt to last the winter. Whoever had laid in those stores knew what they were doing. She revised her assessment of Abel Voss slightly upward. He watched her inventory his kitchen with the expression of a man waiting for a verdict he is not sure he wants. The twins had resettled themselves at the table with a wooden puzzle of some kind, elbowing each other peacefully. The one on the left, she would learn later his name was Eli, kept sliding pieces toward his brother without looking at him. The one on the right, Thomas, accepted them without acknowledgement. That kind of shorthand between 2 people takes years to build. She found it, in its way, remarkable. The garden's done for the season, Abel said from the doorway, but there's still the root cellar to manage, and I need help with the breeding records for the cattle. My handwriting is not suited to the task. Can you read? She asked. Well enough? Then I can teach you to record your own breeding notes. That's not a job for a ranch hand. That's a job for the rancher. He looked surprised. Not offended, surprised. It was a meaningful difference. You've run books before? I've run everything before, Hattie said, and she meant it without bitterness, simply as fact. She had been a cook, a field hand, a seamstress, a bookkeeper for a dry goods concern in Kansas that had gone under in the drought of '87. She had been, briefly, nearly a wife, but that was a chapter she did not open for strangers. She set her carpet bag down beside the stove where the warmth was. I'll see the room, she said. It was small and square, with a cot, a window that faced east, and a nail on the back of the door where a previous coat had hung long enough to leave a shadow. The key was already in the lock. She tested it. It turned. The boys sleep on the other side of the house, Abel said. I sleep between them and this room. She was not sure if that was an explanation or a promise. She chose to take it as both. All right, she said. She set her bag on the cot. She took off her coat, hung it on the nail, and went back to the kitchen to start supper, because the stove was already hot, and there was no sense wasting good heat. The first week was its own kind of negotiation, conducted almost entirely without words. Hattie learned the land by walking it in the early morning before the twins were awake, when the frost still held and her breath made small clouds in the air. The Voss spread was 160 acres of valley land, with a creek that ran cold and clear along the north fence. Abel had 60 head of cattle, a mule named Clyde who disliked everyone equally, 4 horses, and a flock of chickens that ranged wherever they pleased. The fence along the western pasture needed work. She told him so on the 3rd morning. He said he knew. She said she could fix it. He handed her the tools without argument. There was something about a man who could hand over tools to a woman without making a speech about it. She noted it the same way she noted a solid chimney, as information about character. The twins were a separate education entirely. Eli talked. He talked the way some creeks run, constant, cheerful, not particularly concerned with whether anyone was listening. Thomas was quieter, but he watched everything with those dark eyes, and sometimes he appeared at Hattie's elbow without any warning, simply standing there as though he had always been standing there and she had only just noticed. On the 4th day she found him sitting on her doorstep at first light. not knocking, just sitting. "You're up early," she said. He shrugged one shoulder. "Pa has bad dreams sometimes," he said. "He gets up and sits on the porch. When he does that, the house feels different." Hattie looked at the boy for a moment. "Does it scare you?" "No," Thomas said, with the certainty of someone who has already decided something. "But I don't like it when the house feels different." She did not ask him to explain further. She had heard enough. She went inside and put the coffee on, and when she came back out, she brought a second cup with the same amount of sugar she had noticed Abel used, and she set it on the porch railing without any particular ceremony. She was back inside with the door closed before she heard the boards creak under his weight. She chose to believe that counted for something. The first hard snow came in November, 3 weeks after Hattie arrived, and it came fast and without much warning, the way mountain weather does when it has decided to stop being polite. By the time Abel and Hattie had gotten the cattle into the lower pasture and the horses into the barn, the wind had moved from cold to brutal and back again. They worked side by side in the dark in the driving white, not talking because talking in that wind was useless anyway. She knew what needed doing and she did it. He knew the same. It was, she thought later, warming her hands over the kitchen stove while the storm sealed the windows in white, the most uncomplicated she had felt in 2 years. That was when the trouble from outside arrived at the gate, though it did not arrive in the form of weather. A man named Corbin Stills came out from the land office in Pueblo the following week, when the snow had hardened to crust and the sky had gone that particular blue that means the cold has settled in to stay. He rode in with a second man and a set of papers that he presented to Abel at the kitchen table while Hattie was washing the breakfast dishes, and the twins were, for once, quiet in the other room. The papers claimed that Abel's deed had an error in the original survey, that 30 acres of his north pasture, the acres with the creek running through them, actually belonged to a water rights company that Stills represented. Without that creek, the cattle could not winter. Without the cattle, there was no ranch. Hattie kept her hands in the dishwater and listened. Abel's voice stayed level, which she was learning to recognize as a sign that he was working very hard not to let it become something else. "Those papers are dated this year," he said. "My deed's from 1882. Surveys can be amended," Stills said pleasantly. "The company is prepared to compensate you fairly for the inconvenience." "The creek is not an inconvenience," Abel said. "It's my water." Stills smiled the way a man smiles when he believes the conversation is already finished. Hattie dried her hands on her apron. "May I see the papers?" she asked. Both men looked at her. Stills looked the way men like him always looked at a woman who spoke without being spoken to, as though she had materialized from the furniture. "She manages my records," Abel said. He did not look at her when he said it. He looked at Stills. That was the right way to say it, and she noticed. Stills handed the papers across. She took her time. She read slowly, which was not because she read slowly, but because she wanted to be certain. The survey amendment was dated in April of that year. The original deed was recorded in March of 1882, but there was something else. The township description in the amendment referred to the north pasture of Section 14. Abel's deed described his north pasture as being in Section 13. They were not the same piece of land. Someone had either made a very careless error or was counting on Abel not knowing the difference. "Mr. Stills," she said, keeping her voice as pleasant as his had been, "the amendment references Section 14. Mr. Voss's deed describes his north pasture as Section 13. She set the papers down on the table between the two men, corner to corner, so the relevant lines were easy to find. Stills's pleasant expression had developed a crack in it, very small, along the left side. "A clerical matter," he said. "I'm sure the county office can clarify." "I'm sure they can," Hattie agreed. "You're welcome to return with corrected documents if you find they cover Mr. Voss's property." Until then, I think we've all got work to do." There was a silence in the kitchen that had weight to it. Then Stills stood, and his companion stood, and they collected their papers, and they left. Hattie listened to their horses move off down the road until she could no longer hear them. Abel had not moved from his chair. He was looking at the table. "Section 13, he said quietly. "Versus Section 14, she said. She picked up the dishcloth. "They may come back with better paperwork. They may. Or they may decide the effort is more trouble than the water rights are worth. Also possible." He looked up at her then. It was a direct look, unguarded in a way she had not seen from him before. There was something grateful in it, and something else she did not have a name for yet. "Thank you, Hattie," he said. It was the first time he had used her given name. She had been Miss Crane for 5 weeks. She felt it land, that small shift in weather between two people. "You're welcome, Abel," she said. She went back to the dishes. December settled over the Voss ranch like a hand pressing gently on the roof. The days shortened until they were barely enough to get the necessary work done, and the nights stretched long and cold and full of wood smoke. The twins grew louder as the weather drove them inside, and Hattie discovered that she did not mind loud the way she had always expected she would. She had spent so many years in her own company that she had told herself she preferred quiet. It turned out she had only made peace with it. Eli, one afternoon when the snow was deep enough to make the yard useless, dragged a stool next to her while she was repairing a bridle and asked her to tell him a story. She did not think of herself as a woman who told stories, but she told him one anyway, about a hawk that could ride the wind without moving its wings, and it turned out she was better at it than she had expected. Thomas materialized at her other elbow before she was 3 sentences in. Abel, who had been mending a harness at the other end of the table, did not say anything, but he stopped making quite as much noise with the harness. She told 2 more stories that afternoon. After supper, when the boys were in bed and the house had gone quiet in the good way, Abel set a cup of coffee in front of her at the table, without being asked. She had been the one making coffee for 6 weeks. She looked at the cup. "I know it won't be as good," he said. "No," she agreed, wrapping her hands around it. "But it's warm." They sat for a while in the kitchen with the fire low and the wind working at the eaves. It was the kind of quiet that does not need to be filled. She had not had this kind before. The warmth between 2 people sitting in the same room without any obligation to speak. She had not known it was something she was missing until it was there. He had put a second chair by the stove sometime in the 3rd week. She had not commented on it. There had been only one before. She thought about the chair, and about the coffee, and about how a man expresses something he does not have the practice to say out loud. She thought about the notice in her coat pocket, worn to softness now, and about how the thing she had been looking for had not been named in any of the 14 advertisements she had answered. "Abel," she said. He looked at her across the table. "I don't want to renegotiate the wages," she said. "That's not what I'm going to say." "All right," he said. He was very still. "I want to say that I am glad I answered that notice," she said. Even the part it didn't mention. Something happened in his face that was quiet and wide, like a field after rain. "I'm glad you did too," he said. "For the record, Eli told Thomas you were going to stay before you'd been here a week." "What did Thomas say?" "He said he already knew." She laughed. It was not a thing she had done much of lately, and it felt like something coming back that she had missed and not admitted to missing. He smiled, and it was not a careful smile. It was the real kind. By February, the creek had frozen hard enough to walk on, and the twins had learned that Hattie would not chase them when they ran, but would simply wait until they came back, which they always did. It was Thomas who asked her, on a Sunday morning when Abel had walked to the Deacon Marsh's small chapel at the edge of town, and the boys had stayed home with her, whether she was going to marry their pa. She was frying cornbread. She kept her eyes on the pan. That is quite a question, she said. Eli says you already act like it, Thomas said. We don't act like anything, Hattie said carefully. We have an arrangement. What's an arrangement? Eli said from the corner, where she had been fairly sure he was asleep. It means two people decide together what they're going to do and what they're going to give each other for it, Hattie said. Oh, Eli said. That's just getting married. Hattie moved the cornbread off the heat. She heard Abel's boots on the porch before she had thought of anything useful to say in response to that. He came in with cold air and the particular quiet he wore after church, like a man who has been reminded of something important. She handed him coffee. He took it. The boys were looking at both of them with the patient attention of children who understand more than they are given credit for. Later, when the twins had gone to bed and the Sunday quiet had settled over the house, Abel stood at the kitchen window, looking out at the blue-dark yard. Thomas asked me something on the walk home, he said. Hattie did not look up from her mending. Did he? He asked if I had asked you yet. She set the mending down. She looked at him. He turned from the window. I don't have a way to say this that sounds like anything other than what it is, Abel said, which is that the arrangement has worked better than I had any right to expect, and I think you know that I mean something by that. More than the work, more than the wages. He stopped. He was not a man who had many speeches in him. It was one of the things she had come to find valuable in him. I think what you mean, Hattie said, is that you'd like to change the terms, if you'd consider it. She thought about the second chair by the stove. She thought about her name in his mouth, the first time he'd used it. She thought about the hawk on the cold air, traveling without effort, because it had learned to trust what was holding it up. I would consider it, she said. The words were plain. They were enough. He crossed the kitchen in 3 steps and took both her hands in his, and they stood like that for a moment in the warmth of the stove, the wind outside doing what it always did, and the house holding against it the way a good house will. When April came in green and tentative to the Cutter Creek Valley, Abel Voss and Hattie Crane were married by Deacon Marsh on a Saturday morning, with the twins standing very straight and serious at their sides, and the mountains showing the first bare rock above the snow line. It was not a grand ceremony. Hattie wore her second-best dress, which was also her best dress, and Abel had polished his boots to a shine that surprised her. Eli cried a little, which he denied afterward with tremendous conviction. Thomas did not cry, but he held Hattie's hand on the walk back to the house and did not let go until they reached the porch. The notice that had started everything, worn to near transparency by then, sat folded in the drawer of the kitchen table. She had not thrown it away. She did not think she would. Some documents deserve to be kept, not because they name the thing exactly, but because without them, you would never have found your way to the place where the real thing was waiting. There is something worth sitting with in this story, and that is the quiet courage it takes to answer a notice that doesn't tell you the whole truth. Hattie did not know what she was walking into. She knew only that she was willing to walk, and Abel did not know what his terse advertisement would bring him. He knew only that he needed help, and that sometimes what you need and what you are asking for are not precisely the same thing. Out here on the frontier, people had a way of finding each other not through grand announcements but through small acts. A cup of coffee set without words, a key that actually turns, a second chair moved closer to the fire. If you have ever found something more than you bargained for, you know exactly what this story is about. Leave a comment below and tell us, has a practical decision ever led you somewhere you never expected? We would love to hear your story. And if you are joining us for the first time tonight, please subscribe. There are more tales from the old frontier waiting for you, each one about ordinary people doing the extraordinary work of choosing each other. Good night. God bless you and yours.